There was a quiet tap on my shoulder. At first, I thought it was my wife, but then I remembered that it was late Monday night and the tapping was coming from someone else. I rolled over. It was Verena Jefferson, the wife and co-owner of the antique store where I bought the furniture. She was smiling at me. "Wake up, sleepyhead," she whispered. "It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My husband will be back soon, and I have to reopen the store." I half jumped up from the old couch. "Verena, we... Not now, sweetie. Jump in the shower. You can't come home to mommy all steamed up, can you?" "Verena, listen." "No, not now. I need to go outside before my husband gets back. When you're dry and dressed, just slip out the back door. I'll see you Thursday, don't forget." Without giving me a chance to respond, she closed the back door and slipped outside. Jesus, I thought, what have I gotten myself into? All I wanted was to surprise my wife with something for her birthday. Marcia, my wife, loves antiques, and Jefferson's store had exactly what I wanted. An antique set of chairs, actually a chair, and two stools that looked to be hundreds of years old. I had to admit that Verena was still a thing. 6 feet tall, short black hair, swarthy skin, looked to be about 40, smelled great. She lured me right into the house. This was my second visit to their store. Last week I'd walked in and found two chairs. Verena told me about the matching love seat. She said they had it elsewhere in a small warehouse. She was so, how should I put it? So seductive. Those eyes, those black, so alluring eyes. She smiled at me. She led me into the back room to look at a painting, and in a few seconds I was on the couch and then an old bed for two. I knew. I was stupid. As the old saying goes, a man doesn't have enough blood to feed both heads. It's either one or the other. I picked up the chairs afterward and loaded them into my Ford Explorer, but she said the couch needed repair and I should come back again. I went back. The chair still wasn't ready. She called me a second time. Now I have to come back on Thursday. I can't do that. Verena thinks she's made a playmate. But if I don't come back Thursday, I won't get the couch. And if I come back, what will I do? I'm a happily married man. I'm Catholic. I love my wife. Marcia and I, we have 4 children. I've been faithful to her like an old dog, at least until... And now what? I have to drive home. The drive was long and tedious. First out of town where Jefferson's store was, then down the freeway to the interstate, and finally down Highway 12 to our village and home. I had a lot on my mind. What was I going to do? I just knew. Sooner or later, Marcia would suspect something. I felt terrible. What's wrong with me? I'm a good guy. I got a great wife, tons of great kids. Marcia's the best. Marcia's always been one of a kind. Let me tell you, I didn't just meet Marcia and fall in love. I found her. It was completely by accident. I had to almost force her to agree to meet me. Marcia was raised in the strictest sense of the word Catholic. In a family of 6 siblings, Marcia chose to serve her religion. When I first met her, she had already been accepted into one of the regional orders. She had already completed a 2-year candidate training program. If I had shown up a couple months later, she would already be a novice. Then I wouldn't stand a chance. I ran into her once by luck. Luck? Bad luck? No, just luck. In retrospect, it's an amazing happy coincidence. No, just a feat. I got a phone number. I don't even remember who gave it to me. I was 21 years old and still in college. I called. We talked. We called each other back. She seemed very nice, sweet, innocent. Not my style at all. Yeah, but I was Romeo. No, I really was. I was proud of how many I could and had already talked into bed. This one seemed like easy meat. I remembered her saying that she had just graduated from university and was preparing for a life in the ministry. To me at the time, given who I was, that meant something like she wanted to become a prostitute. We arranged to meet at a stoplight at the end of the bus line, not far from where she lived. I drove up, saw her, and almost immediately hesitated. I stopped, honked, got out of the car and opened the passenger side door. She slipped inside. When I sat down and got a good look at her, I realized it was a damn mistake, a big mistake. She had a goddamn hair lip. Pulling away from the curb, even now I remember wondering, how the hell am I going to get out of this? We didn't get far. My awkwardness and her shyness took over. She asked if I could stop. I stopped. She jumped out of the car and started walking and then running, sort of sprinting like girls in long coats do. My first reaction was relief, but then something else came up. regret, remorse, guilt. I jumped out of the car, nearly wrenching the driver's door from the other motorist. I ran out onto the sidewalk and yelled, "Hey, wait!" She was already running. I was faster. I caught up to her, grabbed her by the shoulders, turned her around very roughly, and in a voice that somehow got an octave higher, yelled, "Hey, wait! What?" Damn, she was crying. I didn't know what to do, so I pulled her to me and hugged her. I still remember cradling her very skinny body against me. Damn, she's flat as a board. I remember her wriggling, but I held on. I put the palm of my right hand on the back of her head, and she became still, rigid. She was so small. It was our first contact, and after all, it had been over 15 years. Since then, it had been one of the craziest courtships imaginable. I couldn't explain it then. I can't explain it now. There was something or someone in her that I needed, that I had to have. I craved, I sought, I sought, I sought, I pursued, I chased, I begged. Did she have parents? Oh, brother, did she have parents? She had 4 older brothers, an older sister, grandparents, the whole extended family, and they all guarded her passionately. I couldn't have dreamed of anything like that. It took me months. It was a long, grueling campaign, but in the end, I walked her down the aisle. That's a whole other story, and I don't want to think about it, not now. My stomach twisted into a knot. I'd broken my most solemn vow. She'll find out. She'll figure it out. I know she'll realize it. She'll see it. I'm finished. God, what a fool I've been. I got home. I pulled into the garage and made sure no one had looked under the tarp where I'd hidden the chairs. I warned Marcia not to look, but kids, well, childish curiosity. I fiddled with the tarp for a while and then got up and went into the house. We have an attached garage connected to the main house through the laundry room, then a small foyer, and then the kitchen. I heard Marcia. She was humming softly. Sounded like something from ABBA. It smelled like something delicious. Spaghetti. Maybe lasagna. The house was warm, homey, cozy as it always was, the way a house should be. A real home. Marcia turned to me as I entered. She had a plate of homemade lasagna in her hands. She looked beautiful. Brown culottes, a white apron tied in the back with a bow, a beige button-up blouse, her hair in a ponytail, small hands, dainty little fingers, clear nail polish. Marcia rarely used makeup. She didn't need it. Long lashes framed lush green eyes. Bright red hair framed a perfect heart-shaped face. When she spoke, her lips pressed together and the last trace of cleavage became almost invisible, at least to me. Everything's almost ready. The salad is already on the table. The garlic bread is on its way. She set the tray of lasagna on the counter and lifted herself on tiptoe to kiss me. I had to look away. "Something smells good," I said. "Just took a shower," she replied. I blushed. Maybe she meant, no, she meant she had taken a shower. I grinned. "No, with food." She recoiled. "You're a fool. I meant me. And remember, I taped our show last night. After dinner, we'll put the kids to bed, curl up and watch it." She pushed me aside. "Don't be so weird. Take the garlic bread and bring it over here." Like a hummingbird, she whizzed past me into the dining room. As soon as I got to the oven, the cattle huddled inside. The first to enter was Jamie, a born leader, built like a horse. Second was 10-year-old Wilson, followed by 7-year-old Alan, a clone of his older brothers. Last was 5-year-old Meadow. All the boys looked like me, big, strong-built with brown hair. Meadow looked like her mom, petite, red-haired, freckled, and shy. As always, I squeezed past the boys and picked my daughter up in my arms. "How's my baby girl today?" She wrapped her arms around my neck. "I love you, Daddy." Looking around, she added, "Did you bring me anything?" The boys rushed to the table. Wilson shouted, "Come on, let's eat." Jamie shouted back at him, "Mom first." We all stood and waited for Marcia, the queen of the kingdom, to take her seat. It was like this every night. The boys are loud and boisterous. Mido is quiet and, as they call her, soft and gentle. Everyone knew she was kind of my favorite, but it didn't bother anyone. After all, I had my boys. They were there for me like their mom was there for me. Baseball league, soccer, lacrosse, fights with our dog. I was the dad. Oh, the dog I almost forgot. We have a yellow Labrador named Brandy. Brandy technically belongs to Marcia, But I'm always taking her to the vet, picking up after her in the backyard, and walking her when she leaves the yard. Brandy is 7 years old. We would all sit down at the table, listen to Mom say a prayer, and then get to work. Marcia's a great cook, the best. God, I love her so much. I looked from her to my boys. How could someone so tiny create such big kids? I thought of Varen. What a woman. What was I? After eating dinner, we helped the kids with their homework. I helped Meadow with words. Mom helped the boys with math. We put the kids to bed. Marcia and I made ourselves comfortable and started watching our show. Another Hallmark. What else is there to watch for a woman who's almost become a nun? For 2 hours, we cuddled on the couch. After the movie, we went to bed, but everything else was off limits. We are Catholics, mind you. No diaphragms, no pills, just the natural order of life. By 11 o'clock, Marcia curled up and fell asleep. I lay hugging my beloved and staring up at the ceiling. I had to call Verena. No more. I'm serious, no more. I got up early, I had to get to the office, then to court. I was involved in a rather important case. An unmarried mother's child was given inappropriate medical care. The hospital thought they could get away with it, but they didn't. It was a big case, a lot of money. I don't chase ambulance chasers, but the hospital was negligent. They got what they deserved. I knew that tune. The local radio host derided it as just another frivolous lawsuit. Besides, they all always had insurance. Poor stupid Mom had nothing, until our law firm stepped in. The chattering classes could rant about rising insurance premiums, hospital shortages, and prohibitive malpractice fees, but this mother and her child had rights. After a day in court, I tried to call Verena, but the phone switched to voicemail. I needed that couch, but I certainly didn't want to socialize with this woman again. I had a wife and a family. I was a happy man. Verena was a mistake. We were back in court. We were going to win it. I couldn't reach Verena. I guess I'll clear it up when I go to pick up the couch tomorrow. I checked my watch. 3 o'clock. I hadn't gotten through to Verena's car yet. I pulled into the alley behind the antique store, got out of the car, and walked to the back door. Knocked. A gentleman appeared on the doorstep. "Are you Gary Blackwell here for the couch?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "That's me. The Jeffersons are not here, but they left us to help you with your purchase." Another man came through the door. He was carrying my couch. "Where do you want it?" I led him to the back of the car, opened the back door, and he slid it inside. The first man stepped forward with a clipboard. "Sign here, please." I signed and nodded my thanks. As I headed for the driver's door, the second man said, "Oh, one more thing." He punched me in the stomach with his fist. The second man grabbed me by my tie and threw me against the still open door. He pulled my sports jacket down around my arm so I couldn't resist, and in his most serious voice said, "Mr. Jefferson has a message for you." Using my tie and shirt collar as weapons, he slammed my head into the side door 3 times. The other man, using his fists, punched me in the chest. I fell to the ground. He was about to hit me again when the first man pulled him back. "No, we're just going to jerk him around a little. Give him the envelope." The second man tossed me a manila envelope, and the first man opened my car door. Together, they pushed me inside. The first man said, "Now get out of here." I felt sick. My head was splitting and my chest was pounding. My pants and shirt were torn. I had wet myself. I didn't waste a second. I put the key in the ignition, started my SUV, unlocked the emergency brake, and tore off. I drove as fast as I could, pulled out of the alley, and sped down the street until I felt I was far away from these people in the store. I pulled over to the curb and, breathing hard, opened the folder. No. God, no. I should have known better. A store like this downtown in a neighborhood like this? Of course it was being watched. Mr. Jefferson, protecting himself from possible robbers, had equipped every room, including the back room, with surveillance equipment. I looked at myself and Verena Jefferson. She was sitting on my lap. Of course, it was only a photograph, but there could be no doubt. Next, in a manila envelope, I discovered a DVD. I didn't have to explain anything. How could I have been so stupid? I sank down on the steering wheel and burst into tears. This can't be. What was I thinking? Then it hit me. What if? Oh no, God no. Tell me it's not. I had to go home. Oh, Marcia, what now? What can I say? Oh God, my children, my wife, my family, I've ruined everything. Please, please, please. And I was driving as fast as I could. I needed a story. Okay, I stopped at 7-Eleven for coffee, and two guys tried to steal my car. I fought them off. That could work. I drove home, pulled right into the garage, got out of the car, took a deep breath, it hurt, and walked in through the laundry room like I always do. I could smell dinner. Roast beef, one of my favorite dishes. Come on, look at me. What have I done? When I entered the kitchen, Masha saw me. She rushed over to me. Gary, what's wrong? Let me get your coat. She turned toward the dining room and called, Jamie, Wilson, come here, now. Another second and my two older boys were by my side, helping me up the stairs. Alan stood at the portal and looked at me. Meadow, standing behind him, looked terrified. Marcia, standing directly behind the boys, asked, Who did this? I'll call the police. I muttered, A carjacking, no worries. Silently, my boys helped me to our bedroom. Marcia was in the bathroom wetting and wringing out a few towels. She looked at Jamie. Downstairs, turn off the oven. Have your brothers and sisters set up in the living room? Thank God there's Jamie, I thought. Marcia pulled the blanket over me. I'll get you cleaned up. Where does it hurt? It looks like you've been kicked. God, Gary, we need to get you to an ambulance. No, I'll be fine. I'm just going to get some rest. She looked down skeptically. Gary, oh Gary. Because of the car? You could have been killed. She knelt down beside me, tears in her eyes. It was so stupid. Oh, sweetie, oh my darling. She pressed her hand to my cheek. She leaned over and kissed me. I felt like shit. The doorbell rang. I heard it. Marcia heard it too. Downstairs, one of the boys must have opened it, and a second later, Jamie called upstairs. It was some man. He left a folder. He said it was for you, Mom. Marcia stayed by my side but called downstairs. Did you thank the man? Bring whatever is in there down here. I flinched, but not from the blows. Marcia wiped my forehead with her fingertips. Oh, honey, we need to get you to the hospital. Jamie walked in with a folder. He held it out to my mom. I knew what was in there. My mind was screaming, Put it down, don't open it. Marcia must have read my mind. She put the envelope on the nightstand. I breathed a sigh of relief. If she didn't open it, if she left it on the nightstand, then maybe I could get it later. Marcia leaned over to me and gently pressed her thin hand to my cheek. She kissed me. Try to get comfortable while I take care of the kids. I'll take you to the hospital. And standing up, she turned to the envelope. A curious expression appeared on her face. This is addressed to me. She touched it lightly. It looks official. I felt like shouting, Stop it! She took the envelope and headed for the door, opening it as she went. She turned to our son Jamie. Jamie, and stopped halfway through opening the envelope. She turned to me again, motionless as stone. The expression on her face, I knew, Marcia, My wife reached back and quietly closed the bedroom door. She slowly walked over to the bed and sat on its footboard. She nervously rubbed the envelope. She looked at me, no tears, no anger, just tears. With a face as gray as death, she whispered, Who is she? No one. She's the woman I bought the chairs and sofa from. She fell silent. She just stared down from me at what I now realized was my death sentence. Despite the pain in my side, I walked over to her. I enclosed her in my arms. It was a mistake. I made a mistake. Marcia didn't resist. She muttered, She's old. She looks old. Finally, she looked up at me. Gary, why? I tried to comfort her. It didn't work. I don't know. It just happened. Marcia rested her head on my shoulder, then leaned back. Still looking at those horrible pictures, she whispered, We need to get you to the hospital. Avoiding eye contact, she stood up, turned to the door, opened it again, and called downstairs, Jamie, I'm taking Daddy to the hospital. Be a man and keep an eye on things while we're gone. She slid over to the bureau, closed the envelope in the top drawer, turned to me and said, taking a deep breath, Please put something on. I'm taking you to the hospital. I was at a complete loss. This was Marcia in classic caregiver mode. Honey. Me. Please. She didn't look at me. She took a step toward the door. I'll be downstairs. And slipped through the door, leaving it ajar. I got dressed and followed her. The trip to the hospital passed in silence. By the time we were done, it was past midnight. I had one broken rib and a few minor bruises, nothing serious. When we got home, Jamie was still awake, but everyone else was in bed. Not asleep, just lying in bed. In the living room, Marcia, stroking our boy's shaggy head, said, "That's my man." I added, "Good boy, now let's go with you." Before he left, he asked, "Are you okay, Daddy?" I replied, "I'm fine." He looked at Mom. "Are you?" "Go to bed, Jamie. We have school tomorrow." Marcia was a volunteer at St. Timothy's where our children went. We chose St. Timothy's because it was one of the few co-ed church parochial schools in our area. She played piano and helped with the preschoolers. She looked at me. "You go to bed too. I'll be up later." I needed her to be with me, Marcia. She replied, "Just go to bed." She didn't get up. The next morning when I came downstairs, she was already in the kitchen, packing lunches, getting things ready for our kids and frying me eggs. When I walked in, she handed me my coffee, set a plate of fried eggs on the table, and asked, "How are you?" I took a sip of my coffee. "Good, I think we're going to win." And then asked, "Do you have any plans? Besides school, I mean." She leaned her back against the sink. "I think I'll stop by Mom and Dad's later." I tried to restrain myself, but inwardly shuddered. Marcia's father was a retired police officer, Captain Keith Fitzgerald. His two sons had followed him into the police force. Her mom was a classic Irish housewife. They loved all their children, but Marcia was always special. The last of their brood, a late baby born a little prematurely with her special distinction. She was to be their gift to God. That was until she agreed to marry me. They were kind to us, especially to me. They loved our children as much as any other grandchildren, but Marcia's decision to marry was a disappointment to them. A small disappointment, but a disappointment nonetheless. And I knew deep down they resented me. Her father had never trusted me. Her brothers and mom had tolerated me politely. Only her sister. And now this. I whispered, "Honey, maybe." "No," she said. "I have to see Mom and Dad." "Okay," I said. All morning in court, I was in a daze. My coworkers noticed this, but I had another problem. She'd talk to her parents, ask for advice. God, I hoped. And still, I needed to think about something. I got home a little after 6. I brought flowers. Marcia had another roast in the oven. You could see she was crying. The kids were upstairs doing homework or playing, I hoped. Marcia tried to smile. "How did it go today?" I replied, "We caught them. They know it too. They'll fight for a while longer, but now it's more a question of how much and for how long." "Gary," she said. "Yes, honey? Would you mind if I slept downstairs for a few nights?" "Oh, Marcia. No, I need to be alone. I mean get away for a few nights. I have a lot on my mind." I replied, "No, I'll sleep downstairs. The bed will stay with you." She leaned to her left. I heard a faint whimper. "No, it's the bed." "I mean, I need to sleep here." I nodded. "Okay, if you say so." She replied, "Yes." Dinner that night was somber. The kids realized something was wrong. Meadow's eyes looked big and juicy. The boys shifted their gaze from me to Mom and then back to me. Marcia spent that first night on the living room couch, and the next, 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 and the next. Dinner time was getting worse and worse. I didn't know what to do, but something had to be done. I took a Saturday afternoon and drove to Marcia's parents' house. Her mother saw me and hid in the kitchen. Mr. Fitzgerald invited me into the dining room. "Well, Gary, what do you have to say for yourself?" "She told you." He nodded. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I made a mistake. I can't explain it. I can't understand what I did, but I know it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. I'm so sorry. I know I hurt her. I just don't know what to do." His face expressed nothing, but then out of left field came, "She went to see a lawyer." No, I mean, she couldn't have." Her father replied quietly, "Gary, she's terrified. I've never seen her like this. Divorce is not that. But her lawyer mentioned something like a separation agreement. You have to move out." I couldn't find the words. I was crushed. Not by Marcia, not by my Marcia, not by this. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I need your help. Tell me what to do." His answer was like ice. You have to move out. I could sense he was on edge. One more word from me and I'd be on the floor. I replied, I'll do whatever she wants, but you should know. It was, it will never happen again. He gritted his teeth. Emotions were pressing down on him like cracks in a crumbling wall. Lowering his gaze, he barely audibly muttered, Don't ever do that again. And then looked up at me. He looked old. I stared at him in despair. You broke her heart. To her you were… He shook his head. Go away. Just go. Go home. Yes, sir, I said. I stood up, turned to the door, and walked outside. Mrs. Fitzgerald was standing on the porch waiting for me. She came over and touched my arm. Never noted for her dickish speech, she began, Gary, Marcia, well, not ever, it's her, history, you weren't like, others, people. You were, and her. Oh, Gary, you know what I mean. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Gary, go home, Gary. Marcia's just, you have to make things right. I realized what she meant. I walked down the steps and got in the car. I remembered that first time. I remembered Marcia. That first time. I remember I didn't think she was beautiful, not beautiful at all. Those lips, her nose, it wasn't like that. I took the back of her head in my hand. I used her hair to lift her head. Eyes, green eyes, red hair. No, she was beautiful, very beautiful. If only I didn't have to look at that damn lip, her left lip. Yeah, that's what was wrong. That wicked red line from her lips to her nose drew my gaze, distracted me from everything else, freckles, cheeks, hair. My God, that hair and those eyes. I took my gaze away and looked into her eyes. God, she was looking at me and she knew. So you're Marcia. She started squirming again. Okay, you've had enough, so let me go. No way. Do you remember my name? Gary something. Blackwell, scumbag Blackwell. She started wriggling even harder. I didn't let her go. Yes, it's me, Gary the scumbag. When am I going to be able to ask you out? I thought, have I lost my mind? Then she really twitched. If you don't let go, I'm going to scream. Still not letting go of her, I said, Look, I can't do that. Why don't you agree to let me take you to McDonald's? We'll each get a burger or something. It's the least us can do. We'll talk for a while and then I'll drop you off. So how about it? Why would you want to do that? See? I loosened my grip a little and she seemed to relax. Yeah, I can see that, but on the phone when we talked, I thought we were getting along. She replied, That was a mistake. I was angry. I remember thinking, what the hell? If any of my friends see me with her, it's going to be shit. I said, Look, I'm not asking you to marry me. It's just a goddamn burger for Christ's sake. She flinched. Not only are you a creep, you're also a foul-mouthed freak. She had me figured out. I was probably the last and worst person to be seen with her. Not just me with her, but she with me. I really was a worthless piece of shit. Looking at her and her at me, I realized what a piece of shit I was. I said, Okay, I apologize. I used a bad word. Now how about this? A lousy Coke and that's it. Then I'll drop you off. She agreed. Okay, just a soda. I walked her to her car. All the way there, I thought about my best friend, or almost best friend, who had recently died in a car accident. He was driving a Stingray and ran a red light. He hit a pole. They say the damn thing just exploded. His body was a mess. I was the casket bearer at the closed casket. Yeah, but I wasn't thinking about his death. I was thinking about what I'd agreed to. A good friend of mine had a girlfriend. She loved him very much, but he knocked her up. She didn't want an abortion, she wanted to get married. He didn't say yes or no. Then he thought about it and started reaching out to his buddies, guys like me. One by one, we agreed that if he told her no and she pressed him on it, we would all say we would entertain her too. My friend decided she would look like a slut if we all did that and backed off. No one thought about DNA back then. It was 1998 and we were too stupid. He even thought she might get so upset she'd kill herself. Anyway, my buddy thought his problem would be solved, but instead he got killed. That's the kind of guy I was. The kind of guy who would lie about a nice girl to get a no-good friend out of a bad situation. That was 1998. I was older now, and I walked this hair slut to the car to take her to McDonald's. I told McDonald's so we didn't have to get out of the car. There was no way I wanted to be seen with her. Heck, if this was 1998, I probably would have laughed at her and called her some stupid name and then laughed even harder if she cried. Maybe a couple months ago I would have done that, but now? No, probably not. So we went to McDonald's. Later that afternoon. Back to today. When I got home, Marcia was in the kitchen. I smelled something, probably oysters. I walked in and immediately realized that she knew I was at her father's house. I sat down in the chair. I saw your father. I know, he called me. I didn't know you went to see a lawyer. Marcia sat for what seemed like 10 minutes, crying but controlling herself, and told me, I talked to Helen. They have a room if you need it. You want me to move out? Helen's house is close by. I can keep the kids. You can come over when I'm not home. My stupid pride took over. No, I'd rather… Marcia interrupted. No, Helen's house is a good place. You'll be around if I or any of the kids need you. I might want to stop by and see you. It'll be good for Helen too. I realized I was out of it, but not really. I replied, Helen and I always got along, and after Brian died, she was pretty much on her own. I guess I could go there and then be here if anything happened. Helen was Marcia's closest sister. Her husband, Brian, had died of Hodgkin's disease quite some time ago, and she still hadn't come to terms with it. She had a little boy, Marion. He wasn't even 5, a good kid who was missing his father. Puzzled, I added, Marcia, we don't have to do this. Couldn't we… She interrupted me again. No, it's better this way. You have to go to Helen's. When do you want me to go? Tonight after dinner. What about the children? They already know. Jesus said to the children, what if I stay tonight and leave after Mass tomorrow? No, tonight. I needed help. I needed someone to talk to. I needed advice. I replied, I guess so. Marcia stood up and turned to the pan standing over the oven. We're going to have one of your favorite dishes, fried oysters. That's exactly how I felt. Fried oysters, and in such quantity. How nice. Dinner was fun. No one said anything. After we ate, the kids disappeared. Marcia must have told them to hide somewhere after dinner. I cleaned the skillet while Marcia loaded the dishwasher. I had to say something. I ended up saying the same thing I'd said before. Marcia, it doesn't mean anything. I know. Honey, it doesn't mean anything. I don't know how it happened. It was just… like nothing. I can't explain it. You already told me. Honey, do I have to leave? Do I really have to leave? Yes. Marcia, please? Helen is a good place. I stood there. I couldn't cry. I didn't want to cry. I refused to cry. But I started to cry. Marcia finished loading the dishwasher. It's time for you to pack your clothes. I've washed everything. Don't forget the toiletries. Helen knows you're coming over. Oh, and leave the house key on the table. The house key? Leave it on the table. You won't need it. Besides, you know where we've hidden the spare key. If an emergency should arise, you'll have it handy. But my house key? My key? Just leave it. What choice did I have? She had me. She had the pictures. I didn't deny anything. She wanted me to leave. It made sense. The kids needed her more than they needed me. All I did was pay the bills and serve as a playmate. Anyway, she wasn't going to divorce me, at least not completely, just split up and we would live separately. I would be cut off from her, from my kids, from my life. It couldn't be, but it was. After dinner, I left. Next chapter. The first few days were horrible. As I left, I thought, she said I could come to her house every night but not come to dinner. I can either come before or after. I chose after. I thought maybe it would work out, but it didn't. Marcia would just retire to her room while I was there. Those nights were horrible. Meadow would cry when I came over and cry when I left. Jamie wouldn't talk to me. Wilson and Alan did the same. After the first few times, the boys just went upstairs with their mom and Meadow, and I were left alone. How many times can you watch Frozen? Helen was good to me, but she was still lonely. Her little boy needed someone. She put me in the spare bedroom. Brienne was a good provider. She had good life insurance, paid off her mortgage, improved health care. With the part-time job she was getting, plus Social Security for Marion, Helen could make ends meet. With my arrival, she would have extra help around the house. I, fearing what Marcia might do, tried not to be too generous in giving money to Helen. But still, I helped. The days seemed to drag on. Helen and I talked a little. Actually, we talked a lot. No, we really talked. She didn't ask a lot of questions, but she talked. She told me that Marcia was definitely going to get a divorce. Helen said that Marcia just can't get over what I've done. Helen said she cries almost all the time. We talked about other things too. Marcia was the youngest of 6 children. Before Marcia, Helen was the baby. Marcia's unexpected birth combined with her disfigurement threw the Fitzgerald family into turmoil. Helen first told me that when her sister first came into the world, she hated her. She was an infant, and then suddenly, she was completely different. One evening, as Helen and I were shortening our time together, she told me what had happened. Helen decided that her parents felt guilty, first for having what they thought were too many children, and then for their last child being so ugly. According to Helen, she later realized, her parents never wanted Marcia, and when she came along, spoiled her a lot. I had seen these pictures before, but Helen showed them to me again. They were horrible, my poor Marcia. Next, Helen told me about other things I never knew about. Although Mr. Fitzgerald was a policeman and they had terrific insurance, it didn't seem to cover everything. They were doing pretty well with 5 kids, but then came Marcia, the problem, and money. Apparently, Marcia had options for surgery, and there were several. The Fitzgeralds were offered some pretty stark choices. They could do this, and she would be very well, or that, and she would be not so well. The difference always came down to money. The Fitzgeralds had to make tough choices, and Marcia was just a kid, and a preemie besides. There were never any guarantees. And here I am. At work, the case involving the single mom and her baby was going well. Other cases weren't causing much stress. I couldn't sleep. When and where would I be served? What would I be doing? Would she even do it? Maybe she won't. It's Marcia, for God's sake. She would hate to hear that, to use God's name in such a way. So what do I do? I talked to a friend of mine who has faced similar problems. He wasn't helpful. He said that no matter what, I would be judged. He warned me that if Marcia made me work, it would be tantamount to the kiss of death. About this time, Helen came to me and said she wanted to talk to me. It was a tense conversation that overshadowed everything for several days. Helen caught me in her laundry room as I was fixing a clogged siphon. "Gary, can I ask you a question?" I immediately paused. "Sure, anything. Except for that time at the antique store, have you ever done anything, you know?" "No, Helen, never. Never even thought about it." "Then why Gary?" I was suddenly very nervous. Was Helen asking me this because Marcia wanted to know? Of course she was asking. I stood up and put down the pipe wrench. For some reason, I felt scared. What could I say? What if I said the wrong thing? I knew I had to be honest. If I lied or said something stupid and Helen told Marcia, she would understand. I replied, "I don't know why. I just don't." I suppose I could say I was tired, or loaded with work, or somehow angry about something, but none of those things were true. I actually felt pretty good, even invigorated, at least a little. Was this woman some kind of siren? No, she was perfectly ordinary. On the street, I wouldn't have paid the slightest attention to her. I only remember thinking how Marcia would have liked the chairs. And then this woman was on top of me. It all happened. It all started so fast. Believe me, Helen, if I'd known, if I'd had the answer, I would have… Well… Helen shrugged. Okay. Then after thinking a bit more, she added, "And thanks for fixing the S-trap." And left. I look back again. I think back to Marcia and me, our courtship, that first date. Marcia was pretty ordinary too. Well, the lips, that ugly red line, and her nose wasn't exactly good. Our first date wasn't really a date. We went to McDonald's that day. We talked for over an hour. Once I forgot about her thing, Marcia turned out to be very interesting. For someone with similar problems, she had a melodic, slightly chirpy voice. She reminded me of a hummingbird. She told me she was going to become a nun. I was Catholic and had socialized with nuns, but I never thought of them as real people. They were either unsociable or too obedient and bland, but maybe that was just me. In a way, I could imagine Marcia becoming a nun. She wouldn't have to worry about dating and boyfriends and stuff. But that first day I thought she shouldn't be a nun. Even then, as a troglodyte, I think I saw her as a mother. We talked, but instead of just dropping her off, I offered to drive her home. Wow, what a mistake that was. Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald had a schedule, and Marcia was late. Silly me. I walked her to the door. She got to the door and her father opened it. Mr. Fitzgerald opened his door, smiled at Marcia, and looked at me. Looking at her, he said, "You're late. Who's that?" First day, first trip to the house, and I discovered that little Miss Marcia had a kinky streak. She smiled at me, looked at her father, and said, "He's the reason I'm late." Damn, I thought, this man is going to hit me. But he didn't. He smiled at Marcia again, looked at me, said, "Thank you," and slammed the door in my face. Oh shit, I thought, but before I could turn away, the door opened again. It was Marcia. She reached out, took me by the shoulder, and started to pull me inside, saying, "This is Gary Blackwell. He took me to McDonald's." That's when I realized she had brothers, lots of brothers, as many as 4. All of them were bigger than me, and I wasn't some shrimp. Pulling me into the house, Marcia said, "This is my dad." I shook his hand. "This is Ryan." I shook his hand. Robert, another hand. John, more hands. John, more hands. John, more hands. John, more hands. And Stephen. The last handshake was the scariest. I realized I was at a dead end. Then I met Helen. God, how perfect she was. I willingly shook her hand. While her brothers looked me over from head to toe, her father waved at me. "Nice to meet you, Gary. Come visit us again sometime." I fought back. I will. I was going to ask Marcia out, but had I made a mistake? Dad looked angrier than ever. The fraternity was ready to lash out at him, but Marcia was glowing. Hair, lip, and all, she bestowed a hellish smile on me. "Call me later." To annoy Daddy and the boys, I smiled back. "Later tonight?" She smiled again. "At the usual time." As the door was about to close, I heard her old man's, "What time is the usual time?" I remember galloping, actually galloping down the driveway to my car. Was I being stupid? "Stop." Helen spoke again. This time we were in her backyard and I was sharpening her lawnmower. "How many times have you, uh, well?" Wow, I thought to myself. I replied, "Twice. I've made 2 visits. Here's the bad part. The first time I was really scared, and the second time I thought I could do it." Helen's look was annihilating. She looked exactly like Marcia had the night the pictures were taken. "Helen, help me. I don't know what to do. I love her so much. I just want to..." "She's in a lot of pain, Gary. It's like it changed everything." She lowered her gaze to the mower. "You don't have to do this." I returned the folder to my hand and held it for a second. "Helen, you have to help me." She looked at the grass. "Marcia is my sister, my little sister," then looked at me. Her expression changed. "You really messed up, Gary. You don't know what you did. You just don't know." She turned and walked away. I was served with a subpoena, and it was at work. I was supposed to bring my lawyer and meet with the arbitrator at the end of the month. Hell, I didn't even have a lawyer yet. I tried calling Marcia, but she didn't answer. Jamie answered. He told me that her lawyer told her to tell me to call him. I called Marcia's representative. He was no help at all. He said I should have known better. I called my coworker, who alerted me, and he found someone. Arbitration. We arrived at her lawyer's office around 10 in the morning. I hadn't slept at all. Tired, too much coffee, bags under my eyes, the usual signs of fatigue. It had been a long time. I had only taken 3 suits when I moved, and they were already pretty worn out. I started doubling and then tripling the number of shirts to clean them, and only took 4 ties. Socks and underwear. Well, Marcia took care of all that. I couldn't ask Helen, and she didn't volunteer. I know I need a haircut. I've started growing a beard. I quit drinking when I got married. Total abstinence. But lately I've started again, and I've still lost almost 10 pounds. Nothing's coming off. No one at work said anything, but ever since they found out I moved, everyone has been avoiding me. They all met my wife. I became the pariah of the office. And then we met. My lawyer and I arrived at their office on time, but they still made us wait in the conference room for about 30 minutes. They couldn't have been that stupid. I was the attorney. Then Marcia and her counselor walked in. I almost shit my pants. My stomach was cramping and my nerves were going off the charts. I assumed Marcia would look as tired and miserable as I did, but she looked good. No, she looked amazing. She was wearing a lime green tight-fitting mini dress to match her eyes, a cotton jacket to match, brown shoes with a 2-inch heel. Her hair was styled in a long style, slightly parted to the side, no bangs, but slicked back carelessly on her forehead. She had lost a little weight and was lightly made up. Eyeshadow, pale lipstick. Her ears were pierced, and she wore a jade, something resembling a crescent moon. What a metamorphosis, I gasped. She looked like Emma Stone, no better than Emma Stone. The lawyer made the usual remark to me about the conversation, but it didn't matter. I had to say something. My God, Marcia, you look beautiful. She blushed but said nothing. Her lawyer, an older, very respectable man I had heard of, a real barracuda in such matters, smiled at me. We had an arbitrator with us, a woman who came with my wife and her lawyer. Not a good sign. The arbitrator smiled at me and my lawyer. This is an informal meeting. We are here to discuss Mrs. Blackwell's desire to enter into a formal separation agreement. Are we all in agreement on that? My attorney nodded in agreement. Yes. I interrupted. It was stupid, I know. Marcia, can we just go somewhere and talk? The arbitrator interrupted me. That's what we're here for. She turned to my wife and her attorney. Do you want to start? My wife's attorney began. Mrs. Blackwell is seeking this separation agreement because she feels uncomfortable around her husband after his infidelity. But she doesn't know yet if she's ready to think about divorce. I died inside. Divorce, he pronounced. He noticed this but continued. Mr. Blackwell has caused my client great suffering, pain, and terrible mental anguish. He violated their prenuptial agreement, caused Mrs. Blackwell incredible grief, and shirked his parental responsibilities. My lawyer smiled and nodded, but then I interjected into the conversation. No, wait, I didn't. My wife's attorney interrupted me. You had sex outside of marriage? Yes, but you moved out of the house. But she asked. The arbitrator shifted his gaze from me to my lawyer, to my wife and to her lawyer. Is that correct? My lawyer confirmed it with a nod. I said, yes, but... The arbitrator waved me off and turned to my wife's attorney. Are you requesting an indefinite separation? At least 6 months, he said. I coughed. 6 months. Marcia started to say something, but the lawyer covered her hand with his. He added, probably longer than that. My client has to decide what she wants to do. I'm a lawyer. I had a lawyer with me. I knew the rules, but it didn't matter. I jumped up from my chair. No, Marcia, let's go. I shifted from foot to foot like I needed to go to the bathroom. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I stretched my arms across the table. Marcia? She backed away. My Marcia backed away from me. The arbitrator tapped her fingernails on the tabletop. Mr. Blackwell, please sit down. My lawyer tugged on my coat sleeve. Gary? I looked across the table at my wife and her attorney. Honey? Marcia, looking away, finally spoke. Sit down, Gary. I sat down. Marcia's attorney continued again. We are willing to continue to allow reasonable visitation with the children, and we are open to counseling. We were thinking about 5 sessions. I knew what this was about. I knew it before. My attorney had discussed it with me. 5 sessions was the minimum. 5 sessions usually meant it was settled, and we were nearing the finals. My lawyer smiled again. We thought 10. Her lawyer smiled back. 5. Then the arbitrator smiled as well. Based on my notes, 5 sessions is just about right. If the situation changes, we can add more at some point. Her notes, I thought. This wasn't arbitration, it was a lynching. I looked pleadingly at my lawyer. He ignored me and said, okay, 5. That was the end of it. We agreed to the standard visitation procedure. 1 night a week and alternating days of the week. I continued to bear all expenses. The alimony issue was not formally discussed. I was expected to fulfill my responsibilities. Marcia received an additional expense account on top of what she normally received. When I asked about it, her attorney mentioned something about social expenses, babysitters, clothes, cosmetics, and gasoline. When I asked if that meant Marcia would be going on dates, her lawyer said Marcia might have to stretch her legs from time to time. Stretch her legs? Is she walking away from me? I said, I'd like to start this counseling as soon as possible. When can we start? Marcia looked at me, but looked away after my remark. Looking at her attorney, she said quietly, "I'd like to wait." Our arbitrator looked concerned. "We usually like to move forward fairly quickly, but if you'd like to," my wife interjected, "I need time to think about it. Maybe in a few weeks?" "A few weeks," I muttered. "My God, Marcia, it's been so long since I've been home. It feels like it's been forever. I want to come home." The arbitrator turned to my lawyer, then to me. "I think we'll let Marcia set the schedule." I looked at my wife. I tried to look as pathetic as possible. "Marcia, honey, please." She didn't look at me. The arbitrator looked at Marcia and her counselor again. "Let's take a break for 10 weeks. I have a list of good counselors." He was still looking at his wife and not looking at me. "You can check their references and calendars. When you decide, we'll set up a schedule." Finally, my lawyer had something to say. 10 weeks is a very long time, and in my experience, both parties are involved in choosing consultants. The arbitrator looked at my wife. She shook her head negatively. The arbitrator smiled and turned to her. "There is always room for compromise. Let's take a break for 5 weeks and you can choose your own counselor." Marcia still shook her head in denial. The arbitrator suggested, 8 weeks then? Marcia shifted her gaze from the counselor to the arbitrator, but not to me. She nodded affirmatively. The arbitrator leaned back in his chair. "That settles it. An 8-week continuance while Marcia searches and chooses a lawyer." Marcia tapped her polished fingernails on the table. She almost never did that, but it always indicated excitement. "No, I'll start interviewing attorneys after the 8-week deferral." I burst into tears. But before I could make a sound, my counselor said, "That sounds fair. And of course the cost of arranging the consultations will be covered by Mr. Blackwell through my office." With those words, the arbitrator left her seat. Well, I think that went well. My wife and her attorney stood up. They each shook hands with the arbitrator. Marcia's attorney then shook my attorney's hand. "We'll be in touch." My attorney turned, smiled, and replied, "Take your time." In a hurry, I thought. No hurry? I wanted to go home. I wanted my life back. What's going on? Marcia and her counselor walked out a side door. As they stepped back, I asked, "Marcia, can't we?" The counselor took my hand. "Not now, Gary. Let nature take its course. You'll see. It always works out in the end." We walked out of the office. My lawyer got into his Escalade. I got in my Camaro. Funny thing about cars. Before Meadow, we had a Malibu and a BMW. But Meadow meant a different place, so we bought an Expedition. It didn't last long. Marcia was short and she wasn't comfortable driving it, so we bought an Explorer. But even in it, Marcia wanted something different, sporty. So we bought her a Camaro. The boys, too independent to ride with their mom, rode the bus, but while I was gone, her dad called me and said Marcia needed an Explorer so she could take the boys to sporting events. I was curious how things would work out. My first new evening visit took place. Marcia didn't even look at me, but went upstairs. All 5 of us sat down at the dining room table. I tried to strike up a conversation with the boys about school, then sports, finally video games. Nothing. Meadow was the only one. She and I talked about her writing practice and dance lessons. After about an hour, Jamie called his brothers over and announced, "Dad, we have homework." And that was the end of it. They went upstairs. I chatted with Meadow some more, but it was no use. My first official weekend didn't go much better. I arrived at my house on Saturday at 10 a.m. Everything was ready and we hit the road. I tried to fit as much as I could into my allotted time. We had lunch at McDonald's, then went to a movie. Late in the afternoon, we went back to Helen's house, had dinner, watched TV, and sent them to bed. The next morning, Jamie told me they needed to go home and get ready for Mass. I said I would drive them, but Jamie refused. He said it was Mom's job and that I shouldn't be with her. So the weekend turned out to be a disaster. I included Helen's boy Marion in the program. He seemed to be the only one having fun. Even Meadow was glum and unsociable. I gave up and said, "Maybe next time." None of the kids said anything. I drove them home before 9 o'clock so they would have time to pack. The following weeks followed the same formula. The kids were polite and well-behaved, but it was obvious I was becoming a stranger. I was even losing Meadow. Something was happening. I didn't know what, but I couldn't imagine Marcia turning our kids against me. But I just didn't know. What was I supposed to do? Trying to make sense of the situation, I spent a lot of time thinking back. In the early stages of our acquaintance, Marcia certainly wasn't anyone's cat meow, but she wasn't my cat meow either. I liked her, but there was no love. Nevertheless, I continued to date her. In fact, after our first date, I never dated anyone else. At the time, I thought I was using her. How did I realize that? I figured that since I was dating this little homely girl, other people, especially girls, would see me as some kind of gallant guy, which was great, it worked. But I still didn't go out with her. I guess I felt sorry for her. Besides, I was finishing law school and I needed time to study. It was a symbiosis of sorts. I stayed at home and prepared for exams, and she did her religious stuff. It turned out that either I was in her parents' house or she was in my apartment with me. Both were studying and praying, but neither of them was socializing. It was nice she was so quiet, something unusual for a young woman. I remembered our first real date. I had bought tickets to a play downtown. I didn't know then that her mom had taken her, and they had bought her a new black dress. Her first, I was told later. She was so young. Anyway, I had it all planned out. I would arrive at her house, give her flowers, knight her, take her out to dinner, then to a play, and get her home at a decent time to go have fun afterward. Nothing ever works out the way we plan. I was about to leave, but then some fool jumped out on the highway. He or she changed lanes too abruptly. I ended up in the back of a huge pileup. My car wasn't damaged, but I was caught in the middle of a long line of cars. There were cell phones all around, but I didn't have one yet, so there was no way I could call and warn Marcia. I didn't get to her house until an hour after the appointed time, and it was Marcia's first real date of her life. I found out about it many years later. Anyway, I got to her house, and although she was there, she stayed upstairs. My four brothers and my father looked at me, ready to pounce with fists. I explained what had happened. Thank goodness there is television and the pileup was on the news. Her mom called upstairs and asked to come down, but Marcia said she wasn't feeling well. Of course, that was total bullshit. I was in their living room in a suit and carrying an armful of cheap flowers. I smirked at Mrs. Fitzgerald. I'm tired. How about a cup of coffee? She hurried into the kitchen, and I headed for the dining room table where the 5 Fitzgerald men sat. And there we sat for nearly an hour. I had not the slightest desire to leave. Marcia was dressed in an old blouse and corduroy pants that looked like they had belonged to one of her brothers years before Marcia had come downstairs. Her eyes, even an hour later, were still a little puffy and red. I knew she had been crying. Imagine a first real date. She must have thought I was going to kick her out. I found out later that's exactly what she thought. I stood up. Well, come on, let's go. She was surprised. It's too late, we can't go out now. I handed her flowers, carnations. Forget roses, a first date, and with a whore? I told her, we missed the play, but they're showing Sleepy Hollow at the mall. We'll watch the movie and then we'll go eat pizza. So we did. Later, I didn't regret missing the play. I bought tickets for the Phantom of the Opera. I was very young and not very smart. We were leads on one hospital case and the rest of the work was pretty easy, even too easy. One afternoon, Delbert Clausen, the senior partner, called me into his office. Gary, he began, once we get this hospital case sorted out, we want you to take a vacation. I inquired why. Aren't things going well? He replied, you're doing well, better than ever, but we think you need a vacation. Take a trip, buy some new clothes, get a tan. We know it's hard for you to keep up with your workload and household chores, but we need you on top of things. That bad, huh? He smiled. Yeah, plus there's a couple big cases looming on the horizon and we're going to need you. So I've decided to take a little vacation. But before I left, I decided that I would try everything I could to regain my wife's favor, or at least find out what was going on with my kids, especially the boys. But nothing was working. I tried to get them to go to the movies with me, but nothing worked. Even Meadow wasn't showing any interest. Something was going on. I decided to wait a few days. I kept trying. I called and called, but got rejected every time. After returning to work and closing my part of the case at the hospital, I took 3 weeks. I planned to go to the Bahamas for 2 and return for the 3rd. Jamie's birthday was approaching. I wish I hadn't done that, but then again, the Bahamas was nice, but not for me. There were girls in bikinis, booze, and organized parties, but My thoughts were elsewhere. I just couldn't get Marcia out of my head. I kept remembering something from our past. I remembered the time when I think I started to realize that Marcia was more than just a hedgehog that I was dragging around with me. I dated her for a few weeks without much thought. Hell, I could take her to the movies, buy her a bag of popcorn, hug her, feel good about myself like I was doing something for some underprivileged person like a charity, and still then go out with the guys, pick up a stray and party. Yeah, I've started. Is it shitty? I guess so, but she didn't know. And even if she did, so what? I was practically incognito on all our dates. I think she guessed it. She was always very nervous on first dates. She was about to meet a real stud, a good-looking guy. But after a while, I realized that she realized that we weren't going anywhere, that it was all a sham. I don't remember if it was her or me, but I decided to do a little more to take the next step. We went bowling. To be honest, she had gone bowling before, but only with her girlfriends, and that was after lunch. The real fun was a different story. She had girlfriends, sure, but they weren't real friends. People could be cruel. They did all sorts of things. They went to the beach, had sleepovers, parties. Helen often told me about this. Marcia's friends were always nice to her, but when it came to boys or some kind of social planning, she was on the sidelines. This meant that going to the beach, the pool, a party, or worst of all, a sleepover never touched her. Helen told me that once Marcia had even tried to organize her own party, but all of her friends one by one found a reason to be absent. Did I really hear that and think I had lost my mind? I think bowling was Helen's idea. I picked up Marcia at the usual time and she asked, "What's the movie tonight?" I replied glumly, "No movie today, we're going bowling." My goodness, who would have thought I had proposed to her? She excitedly said, "Bowling? Gosh, I don't have any shoes." I modestly replied, "We'll rent them." And off we went. I later realized that was the case. It was the bowling that attracted me. Marcia had never met any of my friends, and I figured bowling could be supplemented by a cheap burger and Coke and meeting friends at the counter. We played a couple games of bowling. I was a gentleman and let her win, but also made sure she knew. We finished our games and I took her to the food stand. A few of my friends had seen us, but none of them had ever seen Marcia before. Either I was leading her behind me or it was Marcia walking behind me. Either way, she was walking behind me, as were a few of the guys. It was bound to happen. I'd thought about it a couple times myself. Some asshole behind us made a cracking noise, as usual, put a bag over her head. I turned around and saw that Marcia had hurt him. It was like looking at a puppy that someone had just kicked. I may have gone to law school and had what they call social grace, but hearing something like that set me back about 6 years. To be honest, I've never been in a fight, not once, not even once. I'd taken a few boxing lessons when I was at university as part of my health credits, but that was it. And yet there I was. There they were, and there stood Marcia. I did and said the only thing I could think of. I shoved the son of a bitch and growled, "Screw you!" In the old days, a knight would throw down the gauntlet. Where I grew up, it was "screw you." I was amazed. The guy and his friends immediately backed off. The guy who made the remark raised his hands palms outward. "Sorry, man," looked at Marcia. "Sorry, really." And they all hurried away. I threw a glance at Marcia and holy shit, I got the look. That night, in that moment, I stopped being Gary Blackwell. I became Sir Galahad. She had that look in her eyes like I'd just slain some dragon. And with that look, in that moment, she stopped being the little homemade rag bun I pitied. I didn't know that for sure yet. No, I hadn't gotten to that point yet, but she was just a fart and a whistle away from being the one. After that, things started to change. And what am I doing now? Hell, I gave up everything for a piece of tail that I would never wipe my ass on in normal life. I got back just in time for Jamie's birthday. I found out they were having it at the Fitzgerald. No surprise, I was okay with that, at least at first. Then I found out Marcia had a boyfriend, that's what Helen said. You know, the guy she's been seeing. He'd be at the party too. So that's how it happened. I got to the party a little before lunch. I bought Jamie a set of books. He was interested in the Civil War, so I got him Shelby Foote's 3-volume military history. I wrapped them up so they were a complete surprise. Of course, I had to do a lot of reading, but everyone knows books are books. Jamie mentioned one of those drones once, but I brushed it off. I told him that if he wanted another toy, he could save up and buy one for himself, which I did. Parking on the street, I walked to the front door. In the old days, I would have walked right in, but since we had a problem, my problem, I didn't have the same privileges as before. Standing at the front door, I heard a lot of yelling and screaming inside and realized it was my kids and a few of Jamie's friends. I knocked, then knocked again. On my second knock, Alan walked in. He opened the door. Dad? Then, almost without thinking, stepped back and repeated even more quietly, Dad? Hi, I said, did you miss me? He stepped back. Mom's in the dining room. I reached out to pick him up, but he dodged me. Sorry, Dad. Mom and Grandpa. I felt something at my back. Was it a knife? I said. Oh, I see, of course. You said in the dining room, right? He blushed and threw himself into my arms. Daddy. I hugged him as tightly as I could without hurting him. I didn't have to guess what was going on anymore. I let go of him and headed for the dining room, but was stopped. Another man was there, and his hand was resting on Marcia's thigh, a little too possessively, it seemed to me. Marcia's father frowned. I started to puff away, thinking, well, she sure doesn't waste any time. By then the noise had stopped and everyone was looking in my direction. I reached back and grabbed Jamie's gift and rushed into the crowd. There were my boys, Meadow, my wife Helen, and her boy, my mother and father-in-law, my wife's two unmarried sons-in-law, and this new man, all staring at me. Hi, I called out, just got back from the Bahamas. Meadow shrieked, Daddy. She jumped up and rushed into my arms. I scooped her up in my arms. How is my little angel? She grabbed me into her usual smothering embrace. Missed you, Daddy, and kissed my cheek. Then, as if shaken by some electronic monitor, she leaned back. Could there be some clue and I'd missed it? She whispered, You better get me down. There was intense panic in her eyes. I lowered her to the ground, thinking, What the? Marcia held out her hand like she was the Queen of Egypt. Oh, hi, Gary. We didn't think you were coming. I replied, What? Jamie is our son. It's his birthday. I put special emphasis on the word our. Marcia stepped back as if I had slapped her in the face. She leaned over to the man I realized was her new man. Gary, this is Cullen Willoughby. I looked him over. I only had 6 feet and 200 pounds of weight in me. He couldn't match me, but what he did have was Marcia's arm. I held out my hand. Nice to meet you. He took mine. Nice to meet you, too. We had a brief handshake contest, after which I twisted my hand to relieve the tension. I could see that he felt he had won a small victory. I glanced at Marcia. She saw it and thought so, too. I added, You're dating my wife. He smiled at her, then at me. We've become friends. I looked at Marcia, but couldn't understand her. I looked around again and found Jamie's present and held it out. I brought you some books, Jamie. Jamie took the package and opened it. His eyes lit up. Shelby Foote. I smiled. Yes. Marcia ignored me. And the gift. Callan bought him a drone. I smirked. A toy. How cute. No one understood. Willoughby had to say something. Counselor, I heard. You're the one who brought the case against the community hospital when the unwed mother delayed taking her daughter to the hospital until it was too late. The surgeons barely had time to save her, I hear. Yes, only now she's almost blind. He said, I heard. I wish she had taken the baby to someone sooner. I said, too bad she didn't have insurance. He said, I've heard that medical expenses, doctor's fees, malpractice insurance are all problems we live with today, aren't they? I said, You think so? The child is still young. Do you think she cares about that? He said, Don't get me wrong. I don't think the lawsuit was frivolous. I interrupted his arrogant ass. But it would have been cheaper to just leave the baby blind. No, that's not what I meant, he replied. I graciously excused myself. I'm sure you didn't mean to, but medical costs are high. This woman only makes $8 an hour. She'll never be able to afford all the procedures her little girl will need, I added. Sometimes it's hard when you're a parent without means. He gave in. I didn't say her child shouldn't get help. I just figured that almost everyone has some kind of insurance these days. I grinned. Forget it. With the amount of money we get, the kid will be fine, and it will help my kids get into college. From the other end of the table, Mr. Fitzgerald muttered, Ambulance chaser. What a bastard. Even his sons looked surprised. I couldn't let it pass. You could use one of those. I knew I shouldn't have said it as soon as it came out. I didn't look at anyone. It just lay on the table and stank. Mrs. Fitzgerald looked uncomfortable. She understood what I meant, and she knew I was right. But that didn't make me feel any better. That was Marcia's line. I couldn't believe her. You missed the best part of the party. We've already sung, opened presents, and cut the cake. Would you like me to wrap up a slice for you? I shifted my gaze from her parents to her brothers, from Helen to Cullen, and back to Marcia, and realized, regardless of whose sons and daughters were here, and that Marcia was still, at least technically, my wife, this place wasn't for me. I caught Jamie's eye in the crowd. I gave him my best fatherly look and said, "Careful with that drone, son." I looked at my watch. I really had nowhere to go, but I didn't want to stay at my own son's party. Well, I gotta go. Gotta get to work on time. I spun in place and headed for the front door. Walking back to the car, I began to reflect again. What I did was wrong. Sure, I knew it was, but this shit with some other man? Marcia? Where did he come from? And my kids? Her own father poisoned the well. Why would he do that? I hadn't seen Marcia do anything like that, but who knew? I messed up, and I guess it mattered. As the old Willie Nelson song goes, a woman's heart of gold turned to stone. Just as I was approaching the car, I heard someone shout behind me, "Daddy, wait!" It was Jamie. He ran up to me, out of breath. "Dad, where are you going?" "Well, Take me with you." He was right on top of me. I figured I didn't have anything to eat here, so I went to Denny's. "Okay," he said, ran to the side door and jumped in. From inside, he shouted, "Come on." I climbed inside. "Aren't you supposed to—" "No," he interrupted. "Come on, let's go." I put the key in, turned on the ignition, released the emergency brake, and off we went. The Denny's I had originally planned to visit was near my apartment, but with Jamie on board, I decided to go to the one across from the mall down the road. I looked at my boy. "I'm glad you're here, but it'll piss your mom off." "So what?" he said. "Jamie," I admonished. He turned so that he was looking directly at me. His seatbelt wasn't buckled. "Look, you don't understand what's going on." I shifted my gaze from him to the highway. "Okay, but buckle up first." I watched as he complied with my request. Good kid, I thought to myself. Dad, you just don't know anything, and Denny's okay? Maybe you like Ruby Tuesdays better or something? How about Texas Roadhouse? I can get steak and ribs on the side, plus we eat peanuts. I smiled. You're not really hungry. He lowered himself into his seat. More to himself, he said, I have something to tell you. I ignored the remark. We drove in silence to the Roadhouse. When we pulled up, they had a line. I left my name and got one of those electric pagers. The weather wasn't too bad, and we decided to wait outside. I looked at my boy. Okay, what happened? This man and Grandpa and Uncle Stephen, they're out to get you. I thought, you've got my attention, and asked, okay, what does that mean? This man is out to get Mom, and Grandpa and Uncle Stephen are helping him. I nodded. Dad, I heard him talking. He wants to marry Mom. He wants to move in with us. He wants to take our house and everything. You mean sell it? What? Yeah, that's what I think. I don't. He told us. You see, he has 2 daughters. They came to visit us. His wife ran away or something. He got divorced or they separated and... I don't know. He told his mom, but not us. My stomach rumbled. The man lost his wife. He's got 2 kids. The bastard wants a family. He wants my family. I muttered, no kidding. What does he do for a living? Did he say anything about that? Yes, he works in Richmond, but he goes to Baltimore a lot. He talks about something called the Fed. Oh my God, I shuddered. The Federal Reserve. Jamie said the Federal Reserve? Yes, Dad. He works for them. Do you know what he does? The Federal Reserve manages our money supply. Their main office is in Baltimore, but they have offices in Richmond as well. Jamie asked, is he rich? He drives a Mercedes. Mercedes didn't scare me. Nevertheless, I nodded. Maybe. It's the federal government. They pay good money. Jamie was very upset. He had a right to be. Daddy, I know what you did. You were wrong. I was really mad at you at first. Wilson and Alan are still angry. And Meadow, well, she doesn't understand these things. Say, Jamie, does your mom know how you feel? Well, sort of. She knows we didn't want to be around you. She knows that I know what you did. She doesn't know what my brothers know. How did they know? I told them, Dad, I had to. I was so mad at you, but you know. No, tell me, son. I want to know. Our pager sang its tune. I started to get up, but Jamie pulled me back down. Not yet. Wait, listen. I sat back down. Okay? Listen, you're our father. Yes, you were wrong, but still. We need you. Mom needs you. Mom really needs you. Meadow needs you. Daddy? Yes? Daddy, you've been gone a long time. You're at Aunt Helen's. Mommy wanted you there so she could keep an eye on you. She talks to Aunt Helen every day. She hears how you're doing. And yes, she keeps track of where you go with GPS. Daddy, you've got to do something. This person. I certainly understood why Marcia wanted me at Helen's, and I knew she was taking what I was doing hard, but the GPS? And this man? Son, what else do you know about this man? Grandpa likes him. Uncle Steve is the one who brought him here. Really? Yeah, he's a friend of one of Uncle Steve's. They spend a lot of time together. Grandpa is really mad at you. He says you look like some politician, a man named Jonathan Edwards. Who is he? Grandpa says Mom should divorce you. I ignored the remark about Jonathan Edwards. What does Mom say? Come on, Dad, we're Catholic, and besides. Besides what, Jamie? Well, you know, Mom's stuff. She thinks, God, son, that was so long ago. She had surgery when she was a kid, and a bunch of other procedures since then. Sure, her lips were bright red when we met, but she's had so many cosmetic procedures since then that it's almost unnoticeable. Dad, before you did it with that woman, Mom used to tell us about you. You know, she used to tell us what you were like. I realized that was true, and I'm not proud of the way I was. What do you mean? She was telling us how great you were, how you were Superman, how you took care of her, how you made her love you, and all the nice things you did. Man, you must be something. No kidding. She said I was really good? Dad, she loves you so much. You were perfect, and then, well, now I think she kind of expects you to, well, you know. Just then Jamie was interrupted. Mr. Willoughby somehow found us. Damn it, GPS. He headed over to where we were sitting. Jamie, your mom is worried about you. You just ran away. I saw my son's shoulders tense. It's okay. I'm with Daddy. Well, Willoughby said, she sent me to bring you back. My son stood up. I don't need you to bring me back. Daddy can do that. I looked Willoughby over from head to toe. Yeah, I thought. He likes snitching on me for causing trouble more than anything. I turned to Jamie. You better let him take you back. Dad? No, just go already. I'm glad we talked. I leaned forward slightly. Keep what we said under your hat. And winked. It'll be okay. Mr. Willoughby reached out to take my son's hand. He yanked his hand away. I'll go. Just don't touch me. Willoughby looked at me. He muttered under his breath, Don't make her get a restraining order. I raised my hands, palms facing Willoughby. We're fine, and turned to Jamie. I'll be fine, kid. Just stay calm, okay? Jamie threw Willoughby an angry look, then looked at me. Sure thing, Dad. As he walked away, Jamie asked me, Daddy, who's Bonnie Tyler? I waved as they drove away. So what? I pondered. Where did she come from? What did Marcia say to Jamie? What does Bonnie Tyler have to do with this, and how did Marcia know about her? What was I supposed to say? Damn, that was hard. Damn it? Damn it? Twice the curse. Where did Bonnie Tyler come from? Damn it? She was what I laughingly called scum, a fish too small to keep. She was just a silly little girl, so caught up in ideas about love and happily ever after, that she fell for the first asshole who paid attention to her. Bonnie was exactly that. A skinny, muscular girl I found in the library my senior year of college. She was studying English literature and working on an assignment on Defoe when I ran into her. I'd dated her. She had fallen in love. I could have pursued her, but I just couldn't bring myself to defile someone so naive. Come to think of it, except for the lips, she looked a lot like Marcia. I remember letting her off easy. I had a nerd friend. I introduced them. And me, imagine that. She later called me her lucky charm. I heard they got married. I thought about it some more. I needed to pull my head out of my ass. I needed to save my own marriage. Okay, we have 5 sessions. That's a start. We'll see from here. Hell, nobody's gonna sell my house. Willoughby's an asshole if he thinks he can control my life. And Mr. Fitzgerald and young Mr. Stephen, aren't they pieces of work? I'll get to them too. I never ate. I took the electric monitor into the house, found my car, and went back to Helen's. Today, I got a call from a lawyer. Marcia has chosen a consultant, a woman named Melody Whiting. I'll call her Dr. Whiting. We are supposed to have one individual session each, and then the last 3 sessions together. I didn't think it would be like this. Apparently, I was wrong. I had one session with the counselor, and it went about as I expected. She asked me the expected questions. Why we ended up where we ended up, what I want, what I'm willing to do. Do I understand Marcia? All the usual stuff. I talked for about 20 minutes, and she listened and took notes. She said I'd be informed when the 3 of us got together. When I left, she looked a little dismissive. It was understandable. She's Marcia's person. I didn't think this was going to be easy. Today, we had our first session together, which didn't go very smoothly. Marcia wasn't ready to talk, so it was mostly me who had to do most of the talking. She kept saying she had a headache and wanted to go home. Said she was nauseous. Oh my God, how long has it been? I did everything I could. What could I have done? I can say I'm sorry in 6 languages now. I've answered all the questions. I tried to explain the unexplainable. Damn it, how many times do I have to explain that I can't explain how this happened? Dr. Whiting seemed bored with it all, and definitely bored with me. Perhaps he and Marcia had already thought it over and couldn't think of a suitable way to dump this burden on me. Marcia had made her decision. Really, I think she's decided not to decide, at least not yet. I don't think she wants a divorce, but I don't think she wants me around, at least at this point. It doesn't make much sense, but then it appears that she's working up the courage to make some kind of final decision. I'm willing to work things out, but her? If only she'd say something. I spoke to Helen last night. She said she thinks Marcia is thinking about divorce, but she said there's something else she can't tell me. Besides, this Willoughby character seems to be gaining momentum. Marcia is stalling for time. Helen says that none of the kids like him, but that just makes Marcia more determined. Helen says her father likes Willoughby. She says she's never seen her father so sure of anything. That last sentence gave me an idea. Marcia's father is a police officer. 2 of his sons are police officers, and the other 2 work in law enforcement in other positions. I always knew he was digging into my past. He always knew about my spotty juvenile history and some of the things I was indirectly involved in college. Of course, juvenile cases should be closed, but we all know what's best. So, as a kid, I used to steal cars. Hell, I didn't even have a license back then. And in high school, guys hit on girls. College wasn't exactly smooth sailing for me either. I never broke any laws, but there were times when I got away with it. A few girls tried to accuse me. I might have been in the house, might have known what was going on, but I always managed to stay out of that kind of shit. Nevertheless, my name got into the rumor mill. There was an investigation, and I was questioned. Yeah, he had a lot of good reasons to keep me away from his daughter. I guess the 4 grandchildren, the big house, the fact that she would never have to work, didn't matter. I remembered her father, that bastard. When Marcia and I first started dating, Mr. Fitzgerald, after initial outrage, sort of backed off. I realize that now. When I took Marcia to places where it didn't matter, he backed off. But after bowling and when I started dragging her to places where we were seen together, he became not exactly hostile but less friendly, more uncooperative, constantly putting up little roadblocks. I bet he noticed a change in me, and then in Marsh. Mr. Fitzgerald, he's Irish. I thought the Irish were supposed to be emotional and testy, quick to anger, but just as quick to forgive. Mr. Fitzgerald was not like that with me. He was cold, no, not cold, but calculating and always wary. He was the same with his wife. She was like a slave to him. Come to think of it, no one was allowed to disagree with him. His opinion, his approach was always the one. God, Marcia was like a little puppy when I first started dating her. She was his favorite. Until I came along, that's when she started to smarten up. I stood up to him and she was the only one who took my side. I remember it now. I was proud of her and I saw that she was proud of herself. My thoughts were insane. That bastard had treated Marcia like a cripple her whole life. She was supposed to be his gift to the church. And then I got in the way. Helen said that Marcia thought I was promoting children, which is what I'd like. Let me put it this way. In the last few visits, the relationship with the children has not been good. Wilson and Alan are acting surly. Meadow is starting to lose her temper. Jamie is just watching me. He's waiting for something. I think I should do something. I just wish I knew what. Jamie and I text a lot. He uses Meadow's cell phone. He says it's the only one Marcia doesn't check. Jamie expects me to do something. I know he's waiting. I just don't know what. I try to apologize, but Marcia won't listen to me. Jamie gave me some good advice. He said his mom and this Willoughby guy go out to eat a lot. Maybe twice a week, that's a lot. Sounds like a total hoot. Jamie said his mom talked his mom into taking her alternately to Grotto's and Olive Garden. Grotto's specializes in seafood. And of course there's also Olive Garden, but those are particulars. Those are the places we used to go. After some thought, I called Jamie and it all worked itself out. We made a deal. Every time Marcia and Willoughby went somewhere, he was to text me and let me know where they were going. He firmly stated that he didn't like the man and wanted me to come home. We agree. What a great kid. Jamie replied that they were heading to the grotto. I called and verified that they were indeed headed there, and that since there were no booths, Willoughby had made reservations. I made a reservation as well. I drove ahead and pulled up to the establishment just in time for the intended couple. I watched as he helped her out of his car, a gray Mercedes, of course, and ushered her into it. I followed him. The restaurant was divided into several rooms. They were in the largest room. I was nearby, in the smaller one. Unlucky, but lucky in the sense that I was sitting by the window and could watch the parking lot. Realizing that my original plan to disturb their sleep by eating in front of them wasn't going to work, I came up with an alternative plan. I waited 10 minutes and called for the waitress. I pointed to where the suspicious couple was sitting and ordered a plate of stuffed mushroom caps and a plate of oysters in half shells covered with imperial crab from the appetizer menu to send to them. I chose these dishes because she and I always ordered them. I asked the waitress to tell them it was from an old friend who was dining nearby. I had no idea what effect my suggestion had, but not 10 minutes after ordering, the waitress reappeared with 2 plates. She told me that the couple was grateful but had decided to decline my gift. Not 5 minutes later, I watched from my table as Mr. Willoughby helped my wife back into the car. I was disappointed. I had hoped for more. I can't say what, just more. I grimly assumed they would move on to a more hospitable diner. I was still hungry, so I ate an appetizer and then grilled salmon. Good news. As I sat dejectedly finishing the last of the fish, I got a text message. It was from Jamie. Mr. Willoughby had just dropped Marcia off. He said Mom was upset about something. I replied that she was. He replied, UGD. Not being an expert in text language, I guess that meant, you go dad. I knew I had one staunch ally. 2 nights later, Jamie alerted me that they were going to Outback Steakhouse. Yep, new place. This time I got there first and took a seat at the entrance. Marcia spotted me as they walked in. She turned pale, and they left. An hour later, I received a message from Jamie. He had been grounded and stripped of all phone privileges. I recognized the source of his message. He was using Alan's phone. Oh yeah, a new friend? Intercepting my wife and her villainous accomplice in restaurants was one thing, but I needed more. As I mentioned, Marcia was volunteering at St. Tim's School, where our children attended. She would arrive with the Meadow and return when Meadow finished her day. It was time to apply even more pressure. I flooded St. Timothy's School with a variety of gifts, some of which were intended for Marcia, but a few were for the school as well. We weren't rich by any standard, but some things I could afford. I ordered new laptops for the secretaries where Marcia kept her coat. They were only 4 computers, but she must have noticed that I had gotten them as a gift. Marcia wasn't short on attention either. She loved flowers, roses. Now my wife could be called ethereal, if that word can even be used as a noun. One day a week, I made sure she received a dozen long-stemmed roses. On Monday, she got yellow ones. The card said friendship. Tuesday came an orange one labeled passion. Wednesday, the signature red ones with the phrase, I love you. Thursday, the pink ones with our children's names. And Friday, the white ones with Lincoln's quote, love is eternal. I knew my Marcia. If she didn't already know, she was checking the meaning of each color. Okay, I pleaded, what else was there to do? On Saturday, while Helen was mowing the lawn, a delivery man showed up with a large cardboard box, inside of which were 5 dozen roses, all wrinkled and crumpled. At least I tried. Jamie bought a discarded cell phone. We agreed to meet after school. When I got there, I found Wilson was there too. Jamie began. First, before we start, Meadow and Alan don't know anything. But Will, we called Wilson Will and I do. I replied, okay, so what do we know? Jamie added, Mr. Willoughby's wife lives in Richmond. She left him and moved in with another man. She left him and her daughters. I already knew this since I had hired a private agency. Jamie continued, I don't think it's about the money or the mom or anything else. I think Mr. Willoughby just needs a new family. He has daughters. We know them. Wilson interrupted. They're daddy piggies. They're both in middle school and think their shit doesn't stink. Don't call them pigs, son. Wilson looked at Jamie. See, that's daddies for you. Jamie smirked at his brother. He said you'd protect them, he continued. Mr. Willoughby comes over all the time now. Sometimes he brings his daughters. Sometimes he leaves them at home. They kind of make fun of Meadow, so she doesn't like them. I started. They laugh. Not in front of Mom, Jamie added. Wilson said, they tease her about her room and stuff. You know, stuffed animals and clouds and stuff. I asked, clouds, Marcia? Yeah, Jamie replied. Painted on the walls, I finished the sentence. Jamie continued. They're playing Scrabble, and he lets her win. I countered, she's always used Wilson. Yes, Dad, but she beat you. He's smarter than that. He knows a lot more words. Wilson. That's not the way Mom talks. I asked, like what? Wilson replied, he asks her something and she talks about you. She tells him that you were never home before. You worked all the time. You never had time. I got angry. Damn it, that's not true. I came home every night. Sometimes I was late, but I always had a reason. Jamie said, Mom told him it was because you were out with... I muttered, you know that's not true. Wilson smiled. We know, Dad. Jamie looked around. Oh. He nodded toward the parking lot. Mom? I turned and saw her crossing the parking lot. I looked at my boys. I guess the meeting is over. We were sitting in the bleachers. They both jumped up and ran. In unison, they shouted, see you later. I yelled back, yeah, soon. As my boys climbed into the car, I saw Marcia scolding them. I thought about what they had told me. My sources described pretty much the same thing. Willoughby was a top-level administrator at the Federal Reserve. He was making a great living, but his wife had abdicated her duties. About the wife, I wasn't surprised. Teenage girls often exhibit antisocial behavior, directed mostly at their mothers, and perhaps the stress was overwhelming her. Then the second part, she found herself a younger, richer guy. Willoughby wasn't a predator, though he better be. No, he was prey-seeking refuge, and he certainly saw Marcia for what she was. A caring helper, a person always ready to shelter a helpless puppy. And so he found the perfect home. 3 well-behaved boys, a charming daughter, and a woman who found fulfillment in helping others. There was only one problem. It was my home, it was my boys, it was my adorable daughter, and the woman he wanted was my wife. We had a second session. I was confused. It felt like everything I had and everything I would ever have was slipping away from me. No attempts to reason with me, no entreaties, promises, and vows worked. I chose the only path left. I begged, I pleaded, I pleaded, I begged, I pleaded, I pleaded. I cried, I got on my knees. I begged her to forgive me. I begged her to let me come home, to let me dedicate my life to making her happy. I talked to the stone. At the end of our last session, after 40 minutes of stone and ice silence, Marcia finally made a statement. She said, I can't and won't forget what you did. I don't forgive you and I never will. She said. I replied, I've said it hundreds of times, I love you. I made a mistake, I want to make it right. Can't you at least say something to me? Say something other than this unforgiveness. She killed me. Okay. Okay. I'll say a few things. First, how do I know what you said is true? You said it was the only time. How do I know that? You work late a lot. You travel. You get calls after work and you never tell me who they're from. Sometimes you come home and I smell perfume. Sometimes it's lipstick. My father told me you're always out. His cop friends told him they saw you with women. Sometimes you'd come home and be too tired for me. My father's right, you're a womanizer. You've never been honest with me. You're a cheater. I just never thought about it until this happened. Wow. I replied, Marcia, you know that's not true. Some of my clients have been women. You know that. How many times have I come home almost in tears because some crazy woman was throwing a tantrum in the hospital with a baby? My God, Marcia, you know that last case was emotionally draining. You even met the mother. You saw her hugging and kissing me, thanking me for taking on her daughter's case. That's not philanthropy. That's good lawyering. I got angry. You remember the old lady with the farm, don't you? Remember how the so-called businessman talked her into signing the deed to sell the property and how he lied? You remember how she stayed the night at our house and was so upset? You must remember how she clung to me and hugged me, sobbing on our shoulders. God, Marcia, we won that case. You have to remember that. She wasn't listening. I fired another shot. Remember the college girl who almost had her trust fund taken away by a questionable relative? Remember I told you how we beat that bastard at his own game and got her money back? Remember? Remember how she offered herself to me and how you and I laughed at the offer? She growled. My father said you accepted her offer when it was over. Marcia. I couldn't believe her. Gary, she added, I don't know what to say. You told me that woman was nothing, that what you did meant nothing. Don't you understand? It meant everything. It was my whole life. It was all that mattered. She took a deep breath and continued. Gary, I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you until the day I die, but you have slept with at least one other woman. You have broken our solemn vows. You committed adultery. If you have cheated once, you will cheat always. Stunned, I said, Marcia, we can fix this. With the sound of a slap, her palms came down on the table. No, we can't. It's like the candy bowl that broke on Easter. It shattered into pieces. We tried to glue it back together, but it didn't matter. It shattered. This one broke. She raised her left hand to show me the wedding rings. Then she stood up, thanked Dr. Whiting, and walked off the stage. Dr. Whiting smiled at me. At least she said something, and that's something. I looked at her. I don't know what to do. I just don't know. And I didn't. The doctor surprised me. Mr. Blackstone, your wife loves you, but you're missing something. I've heard your story, how you met, the courtship, the problems. I understand that you feel it's over, but don't you think it's time to stop apologizing and try something else? I asked, like what? She looked at me like I was an idiot. If you want her back, try something that will work. I was dumbfounded and said, sure, but how do I do that? She smiled. You don't know? You're the knight, not me. We shook hands and that was the end of it. One last session, one last chance. Was that really all there was? On the way home, I'll admit, I almost cried. Okay, I was panting, but I was also thinking. What was I supposed to do? How could I get her back? What could possibly work? What the hell could it be? I thought about things from our past. Heck, getting her to agree to marry me was something. It all started after bowling. I remember the bowling guy's words kind of knocked the wind out of Marcia's sails because bag on my head was not a new phrase to her. In fact, even her brothers had used the expression toward her several times. Too bad now, I sometimes don't know which one is which. Getting her to go to more public places was not easy. I wasn't an expert at any of the things we did, but I had quite a bit of experience. We went rollerblading, we went skiing, we went fishing. We went to the beach, and with that pale, creamy skin she got burned on, we went to town carnivals. We went everywhere. Sometimes I had to literally drag her out of the car, but after a while I felt proud. Sure, people noticed her and looked at her lips, but they saw other things too. I made sure of that. It took some time, but not as much as you would think. After a while, she became a bit of an extrovert, giggly and funny. Marcia has always been a pretty girl. Well, to me. To others, maybe not right away, but she grows into people. She's petite, with a good figure, graceful, and very feminine. I'd even say demure, sparkling, if you can call it that. I guess that's what it is. And then she agreed to marry me. Brother, it was Donnybrook. I had to talk her into it at first. She was going to be a nun. It took forever to talk her out of it, and frankly, While I was thinking about it, we didn't have any premarital fun, none at all. There were church people who I thought were trying to get in the way. I couldn't and still can't say for sure, but perhaps Marcia's father was behind it. Mr. Fitzgerald was from a large family. One of his brothers became a priest. I had a feeling that Mr. Fitzgerald, his priest brother, and one of the parish sisters who had surrounded Marcia since she was a little girl, were trying to get the whole old gang on her, indoctrinate her that she was destined for the ministry and all that. Someone decided she needed counseling. For what, I can't say. But after every visit to the church counseling center, she became a little cold to me, not knowing what she wanted. When she agreed to the absurd idea of marrying me, I had to confront her mom and dad. Her mom surprised me. She was pleased. But her dad, oh no. Mr. Fitzgerald gave every possible reason. She was too weak, too frail. If she got pregnant, she wouldn't be able to carry the baby to term. I was too big a man. I expected too much. I hurt her, physically and emotionally. She was still sick in many ways and needed constant medical care. She had a heart defect as a child, but that was in the past. He said she would never be able to run a household. People would take advantage of her. In a final burst of anger, he reminded me that she had dedicated herself to the church. I knew that was his strongest point. I was stealing his gift to God. His gift, he said. But I was fine with everything but that, and that's where I got in trouble. I told them that Marcia was a natural mother. She needed to bear children. Any other occupation would be a failure for her. I agreed. Marcia loved children. She loved being around them. I had her. She was malleable. But he had one last argument, and he used it. He proved to her that I was no good. He put up my college transcripts. I had no defense other than what she and I had done, and he even backed it up with proof that I had fooled around during our first few dates. Yeah, that's what happened. It was over. He had exposed me. I remember the look of doubt in her eyes. It looked like it was over between us. And that's when Marcia picked up the spear. She took my side. I was surprised, truly amazed, and incredibly proud. She became Boudica, the warrior queen of the Iceni, the Celtic war goddess of Andarta. I can still hear her saying, "I don't care. I love him. He's a fighter just like you, Daddy. I'm going to marry him. He's what I want, all I want. I want to make him babies, and I want a big wedding with a long white dress and a veil, and rings, and a big bouquet, and bridesmaids, and a ring bearer, and a flower girl, and a big reception with an open bar. I said I want an open bar so I can drink champagne. I want to throw a bouquet. I want all of that, all of that. I want the whole show." Then she looked at me. "And I want to go to Niagara Falls on our honeymoon." And we went. That was it. What am I supposed to do now? I was so confused and puzzled. What am I going to do? Maybe someone could give me a clue? This was to be the third and final session. It was scheduled for the week right after the second, but I needed time. Both Dr. Whiting and Marcia agreed to wait. In the meantime, I was finding it increasingly difficult to reach my children. Helen said Meadow had been told what had happened, and she recoiled from me. Alan found out about it through Meadow, and that's how I lost him. Jamie and Wilson were still around, but I could feel the change. Wilson had taken a fancy to Willoughby, and even Jamie was starting to talk about him helping his mom. I was losing my family. Marcia loved me. I knew it, but she couldn't or wouldn't accept what I did. She had help, that's for sure. Her dad and Willoughby were on top of it. It hit me. Even if we got back together, there would be no end to it. She'd never forget. And I'd spend the rest of my life apologizing. I'm not cut out for this. Then there were the kids. It just so happened that my children grew apart from me. Marcia was right. The candy dish broke. If I wanted to stay close to my kids, I'd have to change my relationship. She could have Willoughby. He needs someone anyway. He would get her and play the role of daddy. I would pull away and distance myself. I'd become a more distant acquaintance. A day dad who lets everyone down but is always willing to call if they need money or whatever. But in this case, I saw no other alternatives. It led to the latter. Marcia was too good a Catholic to divorce, and I loved her too much to let her drown in grief and anger for the next 40 years. After all, there was still Willoughby left. Better to let her go, she'd get over it and maybe marry a man from the government. So I decided. If she didn't want a divorce, I would. I called and got another extension. This time I was told that was it, no more extensions. I agreed. The last time I went to confession, I told the priest who listened to me that I was leaving the church. Of course, all of this involving Helen had to come to an end. I sat her down at the table and told her I was moving out. When she asked where I was going to live, I told her the truth. I was leaving the law firm in Richmond and moving out on my own. When she asked where, I said maybe Charlotte, maybe Pittsburgh. I don't know. She laughed. I didn't know. I then called the lawyer who referred me to the dead end I was in. It wasn't really his fault. I knew who to blame. However, I didn't like his comments and unsubscribed from him. I went online, found another person, and laid it all out for him. I came to a decision. Finally, it was time for the last session. I walked with papers in hand. I had come to the decisive moment. I was to become a man. Total victory or total annihilation. The third session. A momentous day had arrived. This meeting, remembering Marcia's discomfort at the first session, was, like the second, scheduled for late afternoon. Right on time, papers in hand, I waited patiently in Dr. Whiting's far office. Everything was ready. In the morning, I had received the divorce materials from the new attorney and packed the few personal items Helen had taken with her the night before. All that remained was to hand the papers to Marcia. She could accept them or not. If she would accept them, if she would let me, I would kiss her goodbye and pay the doctor. Either way, she would get what she wanted, but on my terms. I sat quietly and waited. The papers we drew up were more than fair. The house, her car, alimony, medical care, a generous personal allowance, temporary funds for emergencies, and a new phone number in case she needed to contact me personally. And so I waited. Was I happy? No, I was unhappy, but I knew we couldn't go on like this. It was the only thing left for us to do. 20 minutes after the appointed time, Dr. Whiting came out. Mr. Blackwell? I stood up, yes. Please come inside. I followed her, but not to where we had met before, but to her private office. As soon as we sat down, she said, "Excuse me, Mrs. Blackwell called a few minutes ago. She won't be able to make it." I asked, "Did she reschedule?" Dr. Whiting replied, "No." "Did she say anything?" "We have to reschedule the classes. We have an obligation to finish these classes." Dr. Whiting's face was impassive. "No, she said she wasn't coming back. When I reminded her of what you said, she said she didn't care. She's not coming back." I stepped back slightly. What am I supposed to do? I wondered. I frowned and looked at the doctor. I suppose I should call my lawyer. Have him call her. Reschedule the appointment. Nodding at the folder in my hand, Dr. Whiting asked, "I see you have something in there. May I ask?" "No, absolutely not. I've given up. She won. It's the divorce papers. I guess I'll have to hire someone to serve them on her." Dr. Whiting fiddled with a letter opener, then with the papers on her desk. "Yes, I guess so." She stood up. "I'm sorry." We both walked to the door of her office. She opened it to let me out. "I wouldn't presume, but you're still only separated. There are no legal restrictions. You can see her. You can hand her the papers yourself." I looked at the papers in my hand. "I don't know." Dr. Whiting added, "You don't have to give them to her. You can visit her. Just keep the papers handy or leave them in the car." Still looking at my papers, I replied, "I suppose I can do that." Dr. Whiting tried to smile. "Call me." I shook her hand. "I'll let you know." So I left the doctor's office and went outside again. What to do now? I figured Helen had kept Marcia in the loop. She knew I had packed my things. She knew I was leaving. Did she really think I was going to stand there, crying and whining at the last session, and do nothing? I walked to my car, got in it, started it up, and drove off. My stomach was tied in a knot. I was nervous and anxious. The trip to my old house was in the balance. When I got there, Jamie and Wilson, who preferred to take the bus, were already home. Marcia, I knew, would be arriving soon too. I went upstairs and knocked on the door. After a moment's wait, Jamie appeared. "Dad?" he asked, surprised. "Are you supposed to be here?" "I need to see your mom." "She's not home yet." I could see that Jamie didn't know what to say or do. "Look, I'll be outside." I pointed to my car. He looked scared. Was he going to cry? He nodded. "Okay." As I started down the driveway, he called out to me. "You know, Mom was really depressed. She's been crying all night." I looked back. I know. He just stood at the door and looked at me without saying anything. I wondered where Wilson was. Walking to the car, I waited, but I didn't have to wait long. Marcia pulled up. I got out of the car. Meadow and Alan got out of her car, saw me, and started to run up, then stopped. Then Meadow rushed forward. Alan followed. Meadow rushed to me. Daddy, Daddy, come home. Please don't go. She didn't cry, but one wrong word from me, and I hugged her tightly. I kissed her and said, it was never up to me. Alan ended up next to me. Hi, Daddy. I reached out and ruffled his hair. Hi, Alan. Are you okay? I think I'm fine. Mommy's crying again. I looked at the road. She was still sitting in the car with her hands around the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I put Meadow down, knelt down in front of them and said, guys, go inside. With eyes wider than saucers, they both nodded and walked to the front door. Jamie opened it for them. I walked over to Marcia. I tapped on the side window. She looked up at me. I couldn't figure out what it was, fear, anger, sadness. Marcia, that's it. We need to talk. She turned away. She covered her face with her hands. Through the window, I couldn't tell if she was crying or not. Marcia, I said, open the door and come out. She looked out again. There were tears in her eyes. She was frightened. She said through the window, step away from the door. I stepped back. She stepped out but took hold of the doorknob. Helen said you were leaving. God, I thought, this is it. What am I going to say now? I answered, yes. She leaned her back against the car door. She was wearing a travel film and a pastel-colored flapper dress, sort of a muted gold, very light brown. It suited her very well. She looked beautiful, but tired. There were shadows under her eyes, as if she had been crying. We were barely 10 centimeters apart. I raised my left arm slightly. Don't lean back like that, you'll stain all your pretty dress. She collapsed into my arms and burst into tears. I held her for a few seconds while she came to her senses. She stood up and stepped back slightly. Fully straightening up, jutting out her jaw and squaring her shoulders, she said, I told Dr. Whiting I couldn't make it today. I could see that she was coming around quickly. I wondered, has the moment already passed? I replied, I know. Aplomb was restored and she, in full control of herself, stated, you shouldn't have come here. For a few seconds I actually believed I had a chance, but now, I said, I have something I need to give you, and started walking back to the car to retrieve the package. She took a step in my direction, then stopped. No, wait. I turned around. I didn't say anything, I just stood there. She knew what it was. What was she going to do? Was it really going to end right here on the front lawn? She stood there like Cowliga. I'm pregnant. I knew it. I suspected it back at the first counseling session when she told me she was sick. I saw how she was dressed and how she looked in the second session. She was now wearing a loose shirt. Moreover, it is said that pregnant women seem to glow as if they have extra moisture or extra oil that they secrete. It was like that with Marcia. It had always been like that. It had been like that 4 times. It was like that now. I replied, I think I realized that during our first session. She looked puzzled, but only for a split second. Yes, I think you knew. So why didn't you? I stopped her. This was about you, not me. About what you want. She sighed. Can you come over tomorrow? I'm really tired. I need to. I interrupted her again. No, I won't come tomorrow. But I will come. I'll help you into the house. I'll help you get into bed. I checked my watch. Then I'll make the kids something to eat. Later tonight or tomorrow we can work things out. She nodded. She really was tired, exhausted. I guessed she had been up all night. I put my hand on her shoulder. She didn't resist. I walked her down the sidewalk to the front door and stepped inside. Jamie, Wilson, and the other 2 were waiting. Help me get your mom upstairs. None of them did anything but walk beside me. I half carried, half led her up the steps. When I got her to our bed, I threw back the covers and the top sheet. All the children were in the room with us. I said, guys, wait downstairs. They left and I helped her take off her dress and bra and put her in bed. When I went to the window to lower the curtain, she whispered, I just need some sleep. I'll be fine soon. You'll wait, right? I turned and replied, not sternly but smartly, I'll be downstairs. I took a step toward the door, closed it, and headed downstairs. As soon as I was downstairs, they pounced on me. The first was Wilson. Aunt Helen called and said you were leaving. Jamie said, she said you were going to divorce your mom. Alan and Meadow just stared at each other, and then Alan said, Mom cried all night. She called Grandpa and Grandma, and Grandpa came over. They had a big fight. Good news? I thought so. I smiled and grumbled a little, but in a joking way. Mom's going to take a vacation. What do you guys say about pizza? How about a movie? Meadow exclaimed, Frozen. Jamie frowned. We all have homework. I waved him off. Not today. Wilson rolled his eyes. Alan looked embarrassed. I said, How about Maleficent? Jamie frowned. Okay. Alan smiled widely. Wilson shrugged, and Meadow exclaimed, Great. So, I ordered 3 large pizzas, we watched Maleficent, and then an old John Wayne movie I liked. I was about to put on another John Wayne when I realized no one else was awake, so I put them all to bed. The next day was school, but I told them not to worry about homework since we would all have the day off. I didn't argue. After putting the kids to bed, I checked on Marcia. She was sound asleep, so I grabbed a pillow and blanket, went downstairs and curled up on the couch. Closing my eyes, I swore that either way tomorrow this nightmare would be over. I woke up to the smell of hot coffee. Glancing at the end table, I recognized its source. From across the room came Marcia's voice. Jamie said you gave the kids the day off. Yes, I did. She asked, Care to explain why? Not until I've had some of this coffee. I picked up the mug and took a big sip. It was hot. I muttered, Delicious. Marcia repeated, Why don't you explain now? Sure, why not? It's a beautiful day, the sun is shining, there's not a cloud in the sky. She interrupted me. How would you know? You just woke up. I watched the weather forecast last night. It was supposed to be a perfect day, so… She tried to interrupt me again. Shut up! No, I cut in. You shut up. We're all going to get cleaned up and dressed, at least you all are. I'm going to wear what I'm wearing now. And then we're all going to go for a ride. Going for a ride? Where exactly? For starters, down the I-81 highway to the Luray Caves. If we have time, we'll stop by the museum near VMI. If not, we'll spend the night in the Hamptons and do it tomorrow. We might even stop in Bedford and visit the Normandy Memorial. Do you know… She interrupted me. You've already got it all planned out, haven't you? I nodded. Yes? Well, she said, standing up, you shouldn't be here at all. I leaned back in my chair and objected. I should. She replied, I think you'd better leave. I took another sip of coffee. Maybe you should come over and sit down. She became so belligerent, throwing up her hands. If you don't leave, I'll be forced to call. I cut that sentence short before it was even uttered. I pointed to the seat next to me on the couch. Come here and sit down. What? You heard me. Come here. I'm not going. I started to get up to call out to her. I said… She came over and sat on the far edge of the couch. What do you want? I replied, No, Marcia. The question is, what do you want? She replied, I want you to leave. I snapped back. That's not what I meant. She started to open her mouth, but I continued. From what I understand, you have 3 options. 1, you can keep the family together, let me raise my children with you, and give our 5th child you're carrying the father he's entitled to. 2, you can demand that I leave, but in that case you'll get the papers I have in my car, and then it's really over. Or 3, you can pretend you still hate me, but then you'll never forgive me while you continue to wallow in self-pity. Which, by the way, I won't allow. You think you're something, don't you? She replied. I replied, I don't think I am. I know I am. I know I'm the father of 4 children with a 5th coming soon. I know I'm your husband. I know you love me, and I know I'm an imperfect man. She was seething. I was pleased to see that. She said, You think that after what you've done you can come here and dictate terms to me? I replied, Yes, and I just did. So what are they going to be? She just sat there looking at me. I waited what seemed like quite a long time, stood up and said, I'm going to go get my papers. She got up and stood in front of me. You betrayed me. You broke our vows. You lied to me. I replied, I betrayed you. I have broken our vows. I committed adultery and even lied to you about stealing your car, but I apologized over and over again and vowed never to do anything like that again. Now, if you'll step aside, I'll go get the paperwork and we'll get this over with. I stepped aside to get to the door. She stepped aside too and blocked my path again. You think I can forgive you and everything will go back to normal? And what makes you think the baby I'm carrying is even yours? I stopped. I put my hands on her shoulders and said, You're a Christian. You have to forgive me. And no, things will never go back, but we can and will move on, either together as a family or separately. And about our fifth child. I know she or he is mine because I know you. Besides, I know when it happened. So what's it going to be? A new reboot where we pick up the broken pieces of the candy dish and really fix it? Or a clean, once and for all, breakup? I took a step to the side again and headed for the door. This time she didn't interfere. I guessed that it really was over. As I approached the door, I heard her say quietly, Why don't we start at Harper's Ferry and spend a week there? I stopped at the door. Over the next few days, things worked out differently. We did start at Harper's Ferry and stood at the Jefferson Stone. We drove to Bedford, saw the D-Day Memorial, toured the Luray Caverns, the VMI Museum, and ended the trip with a walk to the Natural Bridge. Jamie took along the Shelby footbook I gave him, and we flipped through the section on the battle for the VMI. We all laughed at the many movies telling about it in one form or another. Even Marcia was laughing. So what should Marcia and I do? First, we needed to borrow her dad's minivan. She went to get it, but I insisted on going with her. I waited outside while she went to the house and got the keys. No one came out. No grandmother or grandfather. I confess I felt like swearing. We stayed at either the Hampton or the Marriott every night, so we had a good breakfast every morning and clean linens every night. We rented 2 rooms, one for the boys and one for Marcia, Meadow, and me. The first night I had to get up a couple times to keep the boys in line. We were gone for 4 nights and 5 days. School didn't matter. What mattered was what we did. For each night, we rented rooms with 2 double or wider beds. The first night, Marcia and Meadow slept together, and I slept next to them. The second night, Marcia was so tired and exhausted from walking that she lay with me while I massaged her back. The third night was a repeat of the first, but this night Marcia let me listen to our baby's heartbeat. I could also feel him or her move. On the last night after I gave her a massage, Marcia and I sort of cuddled and snuggled together. In all this time, Meadow never once tried to join us in bed. Every day I saw her with the boys. I think they discussed what they should say and how Meadow should behave at night. No one talked about the fact that we were in trouble. Final showdown? When we got home, we put the kids to bed and then Marcia and I had a little conversation. She began, I don't think I can ever forgive you, Gary. You've hurt me. You hurt me very badly. I replied, I know I hurt you. I apologized and begged you for a long time to let me go home, but I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. I'm incomplete. I'm imperfect. I broke the dish. It can't be fixed, but it can be replaced. That's a lot to ask, Gary. I don't know. I do know, Marcia. We're Christians, honey. She tried to interrupt me. Don't call me. I interrupted her. I'll call you honey. You're my favorite, and nothing you say will get in the way of that. Where was I left off? We are a people who believe God forgives. Of course, we are not God, but we must try. Jesus offered eternal life to a convicted criminal when they were both on the cross. Peter lied and denied Christ not once, but 3 times. What did Jesus say and do, Marcia? She was silent, so I told her, He found Peter on the water when he was fishing. 3 times he asked Peter, Do you love me? 3 times Peter answered that he did. Jesus forgave Peter 3 times. He forgave him 3 denials. Peter failed, but Jesus forgave. I failed, Marcia. If you can't forgive and let me go home, then I have to leave. Is that what you want? Is that what you want me to do? Do you want me to leave so you can marry Cullen Willoughby? At this, she rolled her eyes. Maybe if you come home and stay downstairs. I replied, No, if I come home, I'll sleep with my wife. She stammered, You won't, you can't. I told her, If I come home, I'll go all the way. I need the whole package. I need my children, my home, my wife, and I would like to enjoy the love and intimacy that comes with marriage. She muttered, Well, I guess. I said, "No, Marcia, no guessing. If we agree to the end. I guess I'll still be mad at you from time to time." I expected that. I'd be surprised if you didn't. "I guess I'll have to talk to Cullen." "Yeah," I said, "you'll have to. He'll be disappointed. This is my family, not his. You're my wife, not his. And your mom and dad—" She interrupted me. "I've already worked it out." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "What about your brother Stephen?" She replied, "I'll take care of him." I said, "Good, I'll call Dr. Whiting and pay any remaining legal fees." She then finished, "You'll never—" I stopped her. "No, never. You can count on it." I took her hand in mine. It was time to start all over again. We went upstairs and got into bed. Epilogue. A few weeks later, our fifth child was born, a little girl. We named her Mary Elizabeth after a girl who was a saint for her qualities of forgiveness and the mother of John the Baptist. Of course, I love all my children, but I would be a liar if I didn't admit that Mary Elizabeth holds a special place in my heart. About us, about Marsh, and about me, it was still hard for her. I wasn't just the guy she married, I was her Prince Charming. I broke a lot more than a plate of candy. It's been a long time and we're still working on it, but we have kids and, most importantly, we have each other. And what about me? Me? Oh yeah. What did I need to do? I needed to stand up and be a man. I needed to take a stand and stand, or fall, based on what I want and what I believe in. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about courage. There are different kinds of courage. A police officer risks his life when he goes on a raid for criminals. A fireman rushes into a burning building to save a helpless child. A soldier puts on his uniform and goes to war. I never ran into a burning building. I never wore any kind of uniform. I never fired a rifle or a pistol, not even when hunting. But still, I had to make a decision. I was scared, I'll tell you, but I had to risk everything to get everything. And I won. But I was lucky. I had a wife who loved me. That's all. See you later. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.